Chris, a very, very warm welcome to the Business Karaoke podcast. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. A very big welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Brittany. It's a pleasure for me to spend time with you and talk some shop. It's good.
Yeah, that's it. And that's exactly what I do, talk shop.
Okay.
And one of the reasons why I'm so excited to have you on the podcast is because, as anyone who is within 6 feet of me knows, that it doesn't take very long for me to bring up LUMA or design thinking or human-centered
Oh, I
design.
appreciate that. Yeah.
And so that's very synonymous with who I am and also why this podcast exists. And I remember back in 2017, when we first started talking about design thinking in Japan, we were sitting and we were having conversations that sounded like, should we say design thinking or should we say design shiko? So we were discussing terminology still. Like if you're discussing terminology, forget about kind of making deep transformational innovation. Like forget that. Like you're still at the terminology level. It's still very, very immature in a way.
Yeah.
And now all these years on, we've come so far. And I think this is the time for you to come on and for us to talk shop. So welcome again. I'm so excited to have you. But before we kind of jump into things, I'd love you to just introduce to the Business Karaoke podcasters who you are.
Sure. My name is Chris Pacione. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of LUMA Institute. If you don't know anything about us, Brittany is one of our
ask me.
Wonderful. Ask Brittany. She's one of our wonderful instructors who teach for us. But we're a company that equips people to be more creative, more collaborative and human-centered in their daily work lives, we do that by offering certainly training, but also coaching and online resources that, again, help people integrate what's called design thinking, or what we like to call human-centered design, into their daily work. So that's what we do.
Yes, and that's exactly what we're here to talk about. When we say words like human-centered design and design thinking, people are pretty comfortable with the thinking part, but we often stumble on the first part of design thinking, which is the design part.
Design word. Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about the design, as you just mentioned? Do you want to talk a little bit more about the design word, just so as we move forward in this conversation, we all share the same understanding of what it means to design?
Yeah, sure. Well, absolutely. Because I get asked a lot, like, how do you define design thinking, or how do you define human-centered design? And you have to start with the word design. In fact, I found that when trying to explain what human-centered design is to people who may be new to the concept, that it's helpful. It's helpful to clarify what design is first. And LUMA's go-to definition, which you probably know, for design was put forth by a pretty smart guy by the name of Herb Simon. He was a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, where I used to teach. But he's famous for his work and writings as a cognitive scientist and an economist. And in one of his books called Sciences of the Artificial, I think it was published back in like 1969 or so, he wrote the following: everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. And what I love about this definition is that Simon is talking not about a particular kind of profession of design, like fashion design or product design or service design or building design, right? Simon is defining design in a much broader sense, and in effect, that in effect takes the position that design is something the majority of people do, because, well, everything man-made is design, not just tangible things like, as I like to say, toasters and posters, but intangible things like strategies, processes, policies, and laws are all designed. And according to Simon's definition, we humans design these things for one primary purpose: to change the usually less than optimal existing situation we find ourselves in into a better one, to make things better, which is our tagline. So when I often speak to people, and when I'm speaking to a live audience, I'll often ask the question, hey, how many people here design? Right? You might do the same thing, right? But I love to do it. And depending on the audience, typically only about 10 to 30% of the people raise their hands. right? And the reason is that they've been conditioned to understand design as a thing which only professional designers do, right? And because they don't make a car or make clothes or high-end consumables, they don't see themselves as designing. But then I lay this definition of design from Simon on them, right? Yeah, okay, everyone designs that devises courses of action aimed at changing an existing situation to prefer one. And I use it to help them see that even though they do not have a professional degree in design or architecture or engineering, that if they come to work and collaborate with others to get something new into the world, then they are very much involved in the vital and communal act of design. Yeah, right. So yes, products and services are designed, but so is everything from the font in the book you were reading last night, to the paper it was printed on, to the book's content itself, to the numerous technologies that we are relying on right now to connect, record, and listen to the podcast. So and so I love it. So after I've shared that perspective with people, I ask them the same question again. I like to do this, right? So okay, now, given that's the definition of design, or how I want you to look at design, how many people here design? And sure enough, I get anywhere from 90 to 100% people now answering in the affirmative, right? And that's because I've got everyone now seeing and believing that they design, whether they work in more traditional design professions like UX design and software engineering, or in HR, or logistics, or finance, or marketing, or even sales. And so when I'm asked, so what you can see is when I'm asked to define or offer a definition, I do so, but I'm not interested in sharing my definition of design so much as I'm interested in inviting people to see themselves first as designers. Because if I can get them to do that, they will hear what I have to tell them about design thinking or human design very differently. It's relevant to them, right? And so again, if we go back to, okay, what do we mean by the design part of human-centered design and design thinking? It's important that we just don't present semi-relevant abstract concepts to people. And so the way I define human-centered design is the discipline of developing solutions in the service of people. Okay, human-centered design. Okay, that's how I define that. But I first want them seeing themselves as designers before I see that, so they can embrace, oh, okay, I do that. It's a discipline, right? Mm-hmm. So in other words, what I try to impart is that, in particular, when we're talking about design thinking, or in particular human-centered design, I want them to see it as a philosophy of design for all designers. When we as you know this, when we teach it, we're careful to point out that the principles and methods we teach are applicable to all manner of design challenges, all manner of work, whether that be designing some revolutionary new product, or making modest changes to some existing customer support process, right? Mm-hmm. We're careful to say human-centered design is a way of going about the thing that you admitted you do, going about design that keeps your focus on the people you are intending to serve, that is designing for, no matter what the problem or opportunity that you are pursuing. And that's the way I sort of couch that. Does that make sense?
That makes so much sense. My only challenge now is to then say, okay, where do we go next? Yeah, it makes so much sense. And I'm a big believer in design thinking also being the M&M's concept, the idea that it's a mindset and a methodology, the MM mindset methodology. So it's of course the compass, and this is something that I like to think about it. So it's a compass. It tells me, it shows me, am I in the problem space? Do I have to understand the problem? Am I looking to design so to have that, but then to also say, hang on a second, it is actually simply beginning with the question of, who am I designing for? Who is the person? Yes. Who's my user?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing to know about design, that 99.9% of the time we were never designing for ourselves. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you might be. Typically always designing for someone else. And that's the sort of fundamental of it. And yeah, I like your idea of a compass. I think that's good. It's directional. Another analogy I use is the idea of salt or sugar. It's not the thing itself. We are not minting human-centered design professionals. Like we don't eat spoonfuls of sugar and salt. It is not the main ingredient. It's meant to be diluted or flavor what we have. And we very much view as HCD as being imbued in our work in a certain way that flavors it in the right way.
Mm-hmm. And in order to get to that point of flavor, as you mentioned, we almost have to go back a little bit and encourage everyone to have kind of the same start point when it comes to human-centered design. Because when we
Yeah.
get to the table, even something as simple as having a divergent versus a convergent conversation can change things dramatically. So for example, if someone understands the word idea as meaning something I absolutely have to do, and somebody else understands the word idea as something optional that we're yet to test yet, then these two people actually are having two different conversations. And it's quite funny because people often say to me, oh, you facilitate design thinking in Japan. Isn't it difficult, to bring those conversations in another language? And I think, do you know how many conversations I've had in English with English speaking people that are not having the same conversation?
Yeah, that's a good point. Idea can have several meanings, and I think how we think about our work, and this is why certain processes are important. But framing the nature of the problem, just having an alignment on what is it that we think the humans' problem is, or what are we trying to overcome for that, right?
Right.
So absolutely, there's a need for dialogue at the beginning and shared language for sure.
And once we have that dialogue and we have that shared language, this for me then lends its hand to something that you've written quite extensively on, being that idea of design literacy,
Oh, yeah.
bringing an organization to be design literate, which doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean that everyone knows the color wheel. Perhaps it means something. It's a little different. Maybe you can share with us a little more on design literacy in an organization.
Yeah, sure. It's yeah, I love to talk about design literacy. It's one of the fundamental beliefs that really caused us to start LUMA Institute in the first place. So when I talk about it, I write about universal design literacy. What I mean is that it's just a way of summing up our strong belief that we should be teaching design, okay, as a liberal art, or not necessarily as a specialized profession. And what I mean is I'm not saying that we shouldn't be teaching people to be UX designers or service designers or architects. I'm saying that just like with mathematics, you're all math literate, even though I'm not an applied mathematician. I'm not right. That it's important to view design from that fundamental standpoint: reading, writing, arithmetic, and so forth. And the reason is, if it's true that we are all in one way or another involved in the vital and communal act of design, of this intentional change, right? That means design is as fundamental to our way of working and reading and writing as and arithmetic, and it should be taught as such. Okay, it's that common core. Now, the problem is that historically design has been viewed as a specialty, right? Primarily, right? Something practiced exclusively by engineers, architects, and all manner of professional designers. And I do see this needing to change. It starts with our mindset, and I believe it will change. And as proof, just as arithmetic was once sort of peripheral skill, right, until the industrial age brought about the need for math literacy, the need to count, tell time, make simple predictions. If you wanted to work in a factory, you needed to know these things. And we saw this, right? I believe now the socioeconomic conditions of our current age are really sort of signaling the need for millions of people to level up in design, that be design literate. The expanding role of innovation and collaboration play in our daily work, combined with the VUCA world we live in, right? I mean, COVID put an exclamation point on that. And just the ever increasing complexity and rate of change of today's products and services and systems. All of this is adding up or making the case for people to be constantly designing, to be constantly keeping up with the change. And because of that, just like the industrial age did for math, I see us needing to all become experts in facing change and dealing with it on a daily basis. And so that's what I mean by universal design literacy. It's not the color wheel per se. It's not graphic design, but our ability to come together and make things better per Simon's definition. And you know, I'm excited by this future, and kind of proud of LUMA's role in bringing it about. I mean, every person we've had the pleasure of working with and equipping to be good designers in their work is one more person. I think we've prepared for the future of work. I do think this is coming if it's not over here. And you know, I'm also kind of excited about it because, you know, one idea isn't going to really change the world, in my opinion, right? But more people leveling up in design and working together to bring about the millions of changes, you know, big and small, the world needs. Well, I think that would literally change everything, right? There's something kind of neat about that. I mean, you know, imagine a world in which hundreds of millions of people have mastered basic design skills so they can, you know, like we know how to do, right? Frame problems, you know, deeply understand people and situations, generate not just ideas, but maybe unconventional ideas, you know, build prototypes, test assumptions, you know, iterate quickly, all those wonderful things that are the sort of hallmarks of good designers. And because of that, I'm excited about a future where, you know, these millions of people are skilled at, you know, changing existing situations for ones and making things better. I think that would be a radically different kind of world.
Yes. And this radically different kind of world that you mentioned, I'm particularly passionate about for Japan. And the reason is Japan is off all the charts, not necessarily in terms of productivity, but in terms of hours at the office, hours at work, is they're just always, you know, really quite high. And that's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It just is what it is. And one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about bringing human-centered design through the LUMA system to Japan is because when you can give someone the creative confidence, when you think about human-centered design as a toolkit, that, as you mentioned, when you become literate as a mathematician, you don't have to be a mathematician, but I know I can do my shopping. I know what I can buy at the supermarket. I know how much is in my account, and I can pay with confidence and leave with confidence.
You use math at will.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And this helps me make better decisions for my life, you know, because I know how much is in my account, how much I can spend. I can do that math and leave, and I can feel confident and I can feel secure and good about that. Whereas if you didn't have that, imagine the kind of the uncertainty you would have. And I see that in the workplace when I can give Japanese participants who, I also went to Japanese high school, and let me tell you, you're not asked many questions. You're supposed to sit there and listen, and that's it. And so when I'm able to give them, for example, a structure in order to receive or give feedback, this can change their life. This honestly can change their lives. And when I give them some of these tools that they can implement on a day-to-day basis to improve their life at work, what happens is you get more confident people. They come home, they have a little bit more space in their mind that they can ask their spouse, hey, how was your day? Instead of being like, oh my God, I'm so stressed about work or whatever. And so for me, in imagining that world with design literate people, for me, I get really excited about it as well, because exactly that's what I see. I see people having that transition from a good work life to a good home life.
Yeah, you know, there's countless articles out right now. It's called The Great Resignation, about what, you know, why people are depressed at work, or why people are using work. I was just reading another one this morning in Fast Company. And a lot of it has to do with some of the 9 reasons this particular article pointed out was just feeling consulted at work, feeling part of the work, as opposed to just doing what you're told. Doing what you're told over time and performing that way has been shown to have, you know, some derogatory, some terrible benefits, and actually depress people over time.
And if what I would also love to think about is, if we're thinking about building design literate people in organizations, I'd love to hear maybe how you've seen that develop, that evolution from when, because the LUMA system is not something new. I remember we were even having conversations, you know, in 2017 and how we can bring the LUMA system to Japan. if we think about what were the kinds of conversations that we were having maybe at the C-suite level, what were the kind of conversations that you were having around design?
Yep.
Let's go 5 years ago versus today. How has that transition from design into business? How have you seen that evolve?
That's a good question. You know, I think it's hard not to answer this question without, touching on some of the misconceptions of design, and particularly human-centered design. And if we were to talk about literacy or a shared language in an organization, you kept referencing LUMA System, and I'll get to that. But and the first misconception is that HCD, first of all, should only be practiced by professional designers. Okay, so that gets back to the definition. Everyone designs, right? And the second misconception is that HCD is a process, right? And so I think I've already touched on this idea of practice. The HCD is not a it's not a professional discipline. LUMA doesn't teach people to be human-centered design professionals, but that it's as valuable for the UX designer as it is for the marketing specialist, right? The accountant. That's right. But the second misconception about how do you teach it is really the crux of the conversation. Not only 5 years ago, but 10 years ago, and even still today. And that is that it's this. And look, there are people in our industry that continue to perpetuate this misconception. Okay, so let me explain what I'm saying. And so it's the idea that HCD is a yet another one size fits all process. And at LUMA, as you've been mentioning, system, we don't teach a process, but we teach a fundamental set of principles and a system of methods that people can adopt and apply to any creative or development process, right? Whether that's a team conducting a Google Sprint in pursuit of some brand new technology, or a team engaged in Toyota Kaizen process to identify manufacturing issues. Whatever the process is, the LUMA system of methods is meant to underpin it, to be a modular adaptive system, like the alphabet, or that can be combined to form language. And the reason is number one, there are already enough very good design processes out there, right? PDCA, Google Design Sprints are just two of them. So, and again, this is why I might get a little critical, and I apologize, but it's unfortunate that there are a lot of leaders in my industry who would have you believe that learning and implementing HCD inside of a culture or a team is about following some specific set of steps. If you go to Google image search right now and type in design thinking process or human-centered design process, you'll see what I'm talking about. You'll see various models of linear processes, and some of them are illustrated as a loop, that begin with empathy or discovery and end with prototyping, testing, and implementation. You know what I'm talking about. Now, look, let me just make it clear that there's nothing wrong with processes, right? Teams need to align on and abide by common processes. They help teams align on their approach to the work and manage their progress. All I'm saying is that human-centered design is not another type of process. We don't want a philosophy of design, right? That's HCD, which should be integrated to compete with the rich variety of processes that are already out there, and they're quite good, right? Double Diamond, Scrum, NPD, etc. They're all good. Human-centered design as a philosophy is something that underpins, and what I like to say is that it's a way of design. It's a way of, as we like to say, looking, a way of understanding, a way of making, that you can incorporate it into any creative or development process, and is meant to ensure that you are putting your best foot forward when designing solutions in the service of people. That's why I go back to that analogy of sugar and salt, right? You don't tend to eat spoonfuls of sugar and salt. It's HCD is leveraged best and taught best when it's an idea that's diluted in the tea or the dish. Again, as a philosophy, it flavors how you approach your work and your life as a designer. That's how it becomes a common language, because people and teams are going to have different philosophies, and so forth. It's the how, Okay, understand we have to empathize here, or understand that we need to be more empathetic as a culture. What we teach is the fundamentals of how, and the system of methods. Once you practice them and get your 10,000 hours in, is meant to help people develop these traits, or do that very important test and iterate step in the process and do it well.
Mhm.
That makes
Think,
sense. So
yeah, absolutely. That's so important. It's the idea of how, and I think we've seen this many times with other perhaps mindsets, whether it's being motivated or being grateful. Gee, well, how am I supposed to feel grateful? Just wake up. No, actually, when people tell you, take a pen, take a piece of paper, and write down 10 things every day for 30 days you feel grateful for. Then by the end of those 30 days, you'll feel X, right? And that's a little bit more similar to, and I guess what you're saying as well, the idea that teaching the how, the mindset is great, but understanding that there's or having the how is really what leverages it.
Yeah, well, just take gratefulness. Okay, you can put on the person how to feel grateful, but as a leader, how do I make my people feel
exactly
that I'm grateful for them? By involving them in the work. I mean, Rose, Thorn, Bud. Like, hey, I'm working on this thing. We're working on this thing, or we're thinking about this thing. Come here and give us some feedback. What do you think? What are the roses, thorns, and buds of this particular idea or concept? Automatically, when people are asked to implement and think about what's good, give a critique, they feel included, right? They feel like I'm grateful for you because I'm bothering to reach out and see what you think. And so that has a lot of benefit for that. And there's tons of other ways to think about, like, no doubt combinations of our methods could be used to help people feel that I am grateful for their contributions.
And if we can zoom in on this topic, I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on how we can go about encouraging change in larger organizations. And I'll give you a little bit of context as to why I'm asking. Japan is known for these kind of huge conglomerate companies, but also they do consist of, small to medium companies within these larger systems. So for example, if we think of Toyota or Nissan or Mitsubishi or Sony or anyone, of course they have the big brands, but they also have all these other companies under kind of their brand name as well. And so but these companies have also been around for, over 100 years. And there's even studies done, by the Bank of Korea that said that of a study of almost 5,500 companies, 56% of them were in Japan, right? Which means if 56% of 5,500 companies, 56% of those, right, which is half, a little more than half, can survive more than 200 years, not even 100. So we're not even talking the first industrial age. We're talking like 2 industrial ages. And so this is why when people say the Japanese don't change, they're slow, I think this is when I'm a little critical, when I think, well, if you've been around for 100, 200 plus years, you obviously can change. So what I'd love to hear more about is in this, keeping this kind of context in mind, being this like larger, we're not talking 100 years. I always laugh when we're teaching LUMA System, people say, my company say we've been doing this since 1980. I'm like, well, mine say since 1890. So, so tell me a little bit about how we can respect these companies that have these incredibly rich traditions, but at the same time, position them to be a little bit more design literate. Talk to me about how we do that.
I think that's an excellent question. So just so I got my fact right, are you saying that of the 5,500 or so companies in the world that are more than, would you say, 200 years old, half of them are in Japan?
56%. Yeah, so just over half. Just over half.
Well, look, it's a great question. I think the first step to think about is to honor the longevities, as you put out, the longevity of these companies, and understand why they are still in business. I mean, 200 years? I mean, wow. Look, you and I know for a business to survive even 25 years, it needs to adapt and change. And I'll go on the limb. I don't even need to know who these 5,500 companies are, right? Or the 56% that are in Japan, or what kind of customers they serve, to tell you that all of them are still in business precisely because they evolved in the ways they needed to evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, and that shouldn't imply wholesale change, really, right? But knowing what to change and how, right? And that means perhaps having also the wherewithal to hang on to certain traditions that were central to their business. And yeah, I kind of agree with you about that. There's this, look, there's an ethos in the air about change that I think people sometimes misinterpret. What I mean is that we tend to look at older companies as stodgy and stuck in their ways, and for sure some of them are, right? But going back to your question, I mean, first of all, we love to point out the often overlooked fact that any company that's been around for more than 200 years is doing something right. Mm-hmm. And I would say that the thing they are doing right is that they have adapted. Mm-hmm. I guarantee you, whatever they were doing 200 years ago isn't the same thing they're doing today. It can't be, right? And I think what we would see if we studied the rich, long history of many of these old companies is a story of why, how, and when they adapted to the demands of the time. Okay. And so, in fact, I like the fact that it goes past 100 years, 200 years. It's, some of these older companies. In fact, I know some companies in the world are like 500, 1,000 years old. It's quite amazing. And therein may be the best way to answer the question. And this, I would say this, any firm that is reluctant to change needs to be reminded of the changes that got them to where they are today. And the fact that organizations, like organisms, need to be constantly adapting and changing, or else they will die, right? I think it was the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, I think, or maybe it was Socrates, who said, change is the only constant, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, change is scary and difficult, but not changing should scare business more, because ironically, a prolonged unwillingness to adapt to and face the clear needs to make a move will make things much harder later on, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that said, though, I think the more interesting and difficult question, once you've arrived at that for companies, is what needs to change, by how much and when, right? Because again, change, we tend to say innovation, wholesale change. No, maybe the situation calls for very small adaptations. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the wisdom of knowing what needs to change and what needs to stay the same is what allow these companies to survive for so long.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such an important question. It actually brings up in mind also that anytime you speak to a like a purist human-centered designer, that's often the answer. It's, you don't have to go in and change everything. Let's take it step by step. It's the same thing if you speak to a very tech person. Often their first question is, well, do you even need the technology? Maybe there's another question behind it. That's right. If we think about this environment where we're trying to implement change, and where the idea that a high tide rises all boats, we kind of want to bring everyone along with us, and we're trying to implement this throughout an organization. Have you found any patterns or any common themes when it comes to rolling out human-centered design across a larger organization, rather than kind of that startup model that sometimes people have in mind?
So just so I understand your question, so what might help or stand in the way of
exactly? So we're going from, we have these companies that are 200 year old companies, and in order for them to implement it over their entire organization, have you found any common themes or patterns or issues that come up when you're implementing human-centered design at larger scale?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some of the things that come to mind are again, then seeing this as some kind of newfangled latest fad, and they would be right to question it as such. Mm-hmm. that's why I've always been leery of the term design thinking, because it just
Mhm.
emerged recently. Um, what we're careful to do is say, look, there are different monikers. What we're really talking about is intentional change, right? That's a good definition for design. Is you need to adapt as a company, and what we do is teach people how to face how certainly first how to discern what needs to change, when, by how much, and to go about working together to bring about that change.
Mhm.
And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that, a lot of people kind of go in, and when they hear or see examples of design thinking, they usually tend to be these radical innovations, right? And we're careful to say, look, there are big I innovations and small I innovations. And when you think about your innovation portfolio, or what you need to change, yes, there are cases where you really need to change a paradigm. You really need to shift something radically. You really need to revolutionize. But in other cases, it's about evolution, and it's really about, again, the wisdom of seeing that what needs to change and by how much. Okay, that's fundamentally thing. And I think what people tend to sort of accept is that they don't want to hear, look, we're not Apple computer. Okay, we're a company that does whatever it does, and I think they are much more receptive to what we have to say when we talk about change in this continuum sense, and really trying to give them the tools they need to discern and make happen these large and small changes. The other thing I think happens is that people, again, going back to that other mindset that people have, is like, I don't design. Why, okay, yeah, this would be great for my tech team, my IT team, but everyone has to learn this. And that's the other dimension we look at change, right? There's big change and little change, right? But there's also tangible and intangible. That's why we like Herb Simon's definition. Yes, you certainly design a service. If you're a hotel, there are tons of different services and products and things you offer that are very tangible, but also intangible, right? What are your policies? What are your processes for onboarding employees? These are also very important to your business, and can be looked at and designed in the same way, and prototyped and tested in the same way you can do tangible things. And so we found that really kind of helps people see the breadth and the depth of what we're trying to teach them, and sort of absorb it from a cultural standpoint, as opposed to this is for this one team. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And building on that, I'd love to hear more around, if, of course, when it comes to metrics, it depends on the project and the client and all those things. But I would love to hear if, in your experience, you've had you've seen either a pattern or commonalities amongst. Is there a critical mass when it comes to bringing people kind of on board? And I'll tell you why. Because in Japan is a very collectivist society, and if you see, I remember in the beginning when we were first training the first couple of teams, and they would see these teams in a room with pink post-its. There was firstly this kind of question of, well, why them? Two, are they even working? And then once you kind of started walking through the organization, and we started, getting a little bit more mass, like critical mass, having more people go through training. Not obviously everyone had the same level of literacy, design literacy was different, but in terms of how, is there a critical mass, or is there patterns at all when it comes to bringing that, if you train one person, they're just going to be drowned out, but maybe there's a sweet spot.
Yeah. Is there? I don't know if I have a hard number on what the sort of tipping point is. I suppose, it's definitely not one. It's not one team. In fact, that's one of the main reasons why back in 2015, I told the company, so workshops are great, but we have to stop thinking of ourselves as a workshops company. And until people adopt these new behaviors and use them on a daily basis inside their everyday work, you're not going to see any kind of change. And mind you, we got really high scores in the NPSs. We had wonderful people like yourself putting on what I would say are nothing short than extraordinary learning experiences. People come away transformed. But when they go back into the workplace, if they don't have a counterpart, they might as well be speaking Greek, right? Yeah, some other language people don't understand. And so what we try to do is, this is why we mainly serve companies, because we realize, yes, we certainly will happily teach a team and happily teach an individual, but they often are an island inside these large organizations. And so what we really try to do is we'll often start there, but we'll try to, if allowed, to work our way up if we don't already have a conversation going with the C-suite and saying, hey, it's a larger cultural thing going on here, and here's what your teams are doing. And so again, I don't know what the number is. Like maybe it's I don't know, 25%. Like if people start seeing it, enough of it over time, it becomes a norm. It doesn't become the sort of thing sticking out and kind of what's that, as unusual. And the other thing is, again, it's not about making a big to do about it. Hey, we're doing human-centered design. Hey, we're using sugar. Use it. I'm going to have a spoonful of sugar. When people start using it in their daily stand-ups or their weekly check-ins, their everyday work, because these are the things people are doing on a daily basis to get something done, it becomes more practical. And a lot of what we find is what we try to coach people is like, don't make a big deal of it. Just use the methods in your daily work. And then sure enough, people say, that was a really good meeting. What is that thing you did? Oh, and then show them the method and so forth. So, but yeah, I don't know if I have any hard data on a sort of tipping point. I would say, ideally, 100% of your knowledge workers, the people that are in a position to not only do the work, but change the way they go about the work or make changes to particular products or services or the way they're just doing things, who are designing, I'd say you'd want 100% of that. That's really the goal.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard for one person or one team to get anything going.
I love that as well. When you mentioned that sometimes you don't have to mention it at all, sometimes you just do it. In our design thinking, or the way that I teach design thinking in Japan, is that the first couple of times I tried to introduce this thing called an innovation mindset, right? Or the design thinking 6 behaviors, right?
Yeah.
No, zero reaction. I was like, this is somehow not working. And then I recognized, hang on a second, if I take the word innovation, if I say have an innovation mindset, it's like, what does that mean? And then in order for me to explain an innovation mindset, I have to use other English words like visualize and empathize. And it was getting me nowhere. I'm like, this is not working. And then I thought, I need to change things up. And so I thought, where are Japanese people open, collaborative, people are on a flat playing field, that they can be creative and fun and iterative. And I thought, well, take out alcohol and it's karaoke, right? It's karaoke. It's essentially a karaoke bar. And so instead of having to teach, this is design thinking, this is innovation, I just say, put your karaoke mindset on, and immediately everybody knows what to do.
Well, so I'm just curious, with the karaoke mindset, how would you describe it?
The karaoke mindset is exactly what we say. So the first thing is get out of the building, right? You can't have karaoke in your office. So you have to get out of the building. Another one is you have to empathize. If somebody's singing and they're terrible and they're singing Whitney Houston and they're just failing, you don't say you're an idiot. You go, yes, go. You try to get in there with it. Another one is you have to show it. I can't tell you this is how I'm going to sing a song. You have to sing it, right? Make it. Radical collaboration. If I'm the CEO and my intern needs a drink, I order her a drink, or I would, and even even iteration, right? The idea of quick wins. A song is only like 2.5 minutes. You don't have to sing for 2 hours, just 2.5 minutes, sing, get out of there.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think anybody that opens up, it gets them to be open to some new mindsets, because I think those mindsets are important, right? Iterative and so forth. And innovation is one of those sort of blockage words. Like, it's not my job to innovate. It's one of those big words, or design. And often what I'll do is I'll try to, at least in my own way, because I don't think that karaoke metaphor would work over here in the States where I mainly interact. But I try to break it down. It's like, look, don't hold innovation up on a pedestal. It comes from the Latin, 15th century Latin, innovare, which means to make new again, to renew. That's all. And that's where we get the sort of, you can do that in a big way or a small way. We are called. There are literally thousands of things teaming around us in our daily business, calling for change. Now, what happens too is that some people are like, well, I'm not being asked, or I've never been taught to do that. I went to school and I was told what to do, and I work at a place that very much doesn't want to hear my opinion. And that's where it gets to the culture part. And that's where there are a lot of companies out there just not ready for this. There's a readiness factor. When you think about the different factors that help companies sort of work in this new way, if for example, if management is still stuck on sort of a command and control, top down kind of way, it's very hard to do some of the things that we know that we teach them. Like, here's how to frame a problem. It's like, reframe, like, no, I'm given the problem, and then
this is the problem. Yeah, this is it. Yeah.
And so, at some point you've got to break. You can't just teach. You can, the way we look at it, we go from a bottom up and a top down approach. We try to work with the folks on the trenches doing the work and the leaders and say, look, this stuff is going to sort of require some different kinds of mindsets and openness to certain things like problem framing. And we say, look, as a leader, just take that one issue. As an employee, no, just don't go off and reframe the problem. That's autonomy. That's self-rule. Your people should have the latitude, and leaders shouldn't go and say, okay, here's the problem, I don't want to hear it. Look, work together. The methods that we teach are great to have a half an hour meeting to align on the problem. Say, hey, here's what we see. Here's what we think is going on. And for leaders and people from middle management to get together and kind of discuss it, have good dialogue that might lead to a better and shared understanding of what the problem is. That's really how we see it.
Would you say that lends itself more to then the environment as well? So not only, for example, human-centered design itself as a mindset and also as a methodology is in the how-to, but it also sounds like that the C-suite is also responsible for an environment in which that can happen. How would you describe that environment? How when you sit down with a C-suite, what are you telling them that they need to kind of shoot for?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it really the leadership is responsible for the ethos. Okay, so often we'll go to companies and some of the readiness things I look for. I said, first of all, before you go and spend a lot of money on programs and what we're going to do for you, number one, you have to communicate. People have to have a conviction. Everyone has the conviction that design and innovation is part of their job. You don't want us going in there and saying, hey, design, innovation, frame problems, giving them that freedom, and then you're not echoing that, because they won't take the bait. They have to, so that sort of collective conviction. The second thing is, I think that leaders have to do in order for human-centered design to take off, is this idea of shared purpose. And what are we trying to do as a company collectively? I think is a very important thing for leadership to sort of set the tone for, right? Look, I can teach people how to frame problems, and we can teach people how to iterate and test. But if everybody is working to different ends, if you don't have a clear strategy and a mission, then you're going to get we're teaching people to be creative in these sort of direct different ways, which isn't necessarily good. And the third thing I think is the responsibility of leadership is this idea of risk savviness. So and I know, part of design and innovation is designing something that doesn't exist yet, and therefore always inherent is risk. Risk tends to be more inherent in big change, but even in little change, right? And so if you come from a culture, and this will be most of us, I don't know how prevalent this is in Japan, but the fear of failure, the fear of taking risks. If people aren't given explicit permission to go in and try these things, then they won't do it. We can teach them all day how to do it, but if you don't set the groundwork, and a lot of companies go even further. They will reward proper risk taking, and so it's this, what we call it is sort of being risk savvy. Like what you want to as a leadership team, in order to sort of sort of cultivate the ground, if you will. If we're going to go and plant all these seeds, the thing you have to do as leaders with regard to this idea of risk is ensure that people are risk savvy. What we mean by that is not just taking reckless risk, right? But it's knowing how to take risks. So we always use the analogy of a scientist, right? A scientist is a good thing. Good scientist is that, to a scientist, they experiment, right? So they don't experiment big, they experiment small. They create little experiments in a lab, which are controlled, right? Which is what we need to do. And when they get a wrong answer, it's not a sign of bad science. When they fail, it's knowledge. Okay, not this, let's try it again. And but they don't go crazy like, oh my gosh, is a good answer.
I'm a terrible scientist.
Yeah, it's they don't over celebrate. It's like, it's data.
Yeah.
Yes or no, did this work or not? And you want to get your people thinking about designing the same way, that we work with these various people and these new concepts, and we try things out. Bad answers, or sorry, wrong answers are not bad. They're just as useful to us. They give us the learning that we need to take the next step just as much as good answers. And again, that has to be set by the leadership. You've got to set that tone, and you set it by the policies, the way you reward people, you know, and the way you make people feel when they fail, and they will fail from time to time, right? And how you teach them, right? I mean, in some organizations, you know, failure is not an option. And so you got to teach them, like, well, how can we fail here in a controlled way to give us the learning without, you know, exposing us to other dangers. So that risk savviness is an important concept. Again, that has to be set by leadership.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Japan ranks incredibly high on risk aversion in all cases. So I think your suggestion of implementing structures and processes, I think, is really one of those things that is perhaps missing. If I think about, you know, the organizations that say, no, we don't want to take risk, or you can't fail, there's actually there's no safety net. There's no there's not even a feedback process for a manager to take with their team if something had worked well or not. And of course, that's for me like entering into the black with no, or into the dark with no compass or no map. I'd be scared too. So
yeah, I was gonna say, and we have to respect a company that fears risks. They kind of should. I mean, don't want to blow up the company, right? It's like, it's a matter of compartmentalizing. How can we learn? How can we take really small little bets in ways that give us an indication of what might happen when we really do this? That's all that is.
Absolutely. So this leads me to my final question, because I can't believe our hour is already up. But it's kind of a bridge from, I had the exact same thing where I was working with a company, they were 400 years old, and they said, and they were like, we have you know, we're just not creative. We're just simply not creative. It's just not working. And then as we started doing a little bit more scoping, rose on bud, asking what's going well, what's not going well, all of the roses were like, we so respect the history of this company. It's such an honor to work for this brand and that what we do. And then we started seeing the thorns. The thorns were things like, but I'm scared because I don't want to be the idiot that bankrupts a 400-year-old company. We don't want to be the ones in the chairs. It's like musical chairs. They've had these issues like for a long time, but you don't want to be the one sitting in a chair when the company goes bust, right? So what I'd love to hear as just kind of a final thoughts moving on is how ordinary people who weren't, and it's funny because they often say like, Brittany, that's easy for you because in Silicon Valley, everybody's born creative. This is Japan. This is different, but it's not, right? I don't think that's the case. I'd love to hear your view on how groups of ordinary people can do extraordinary things.
Yeah. Fundamentally, I do believe most innovations come about through not the sort of mythic innovative hero, but through the small contributions of people. But you use the term extraordinary, which can have two different meanings. So let me unpack it a little bit. This is a really good question. So yeah, there is this assumption that in order to do something extraordinary, you need to sort of stick out, right? And or at least stick your neck out. That's the phrase. And nobody wants to do that and be off and be the person that did something wrong. And that's because our collective culture is sort of inundated with stories about heroes who supposedly took some bold or different action outside the ordinary course of events to bring about something extraordinary, right? But yeah, I believe in reality, most extraordinary outcomes are the sum of ordinary people going about their ordinary jobs, and actually make for terribly boring books and movies. I mean, that's the truth. I mean, while it's true, there are some times in life that demand that we step up and take a stand on something. I think those moments are actually rare. In fact, I would say some people get rather addicted to sticking out when another and better course of action, when confronted with pushback or a risk, is simply to use the feedback and quietly get to work on overcoming the obstacles you face. Simply. I mean, so look at what SpaceX just did, right? A large group of ordinary people, mathematicians and metal fabricators and scientists and seamstresses, making the uniforms that the astronauts wore. They safely sent 4 other ordinary people to space and back, right? And that was extraordinary. But if we look at the history, everything from the invention of the light bulb, right? The light bulb was not invented by Thomas Edison. It wasn't. It was innovated upon, starting all the way back to the first incandescent light discovered back in 1802, right? If we look at history, everything again from the invention of the light bulb to the creation of the iPhone, we see that it wasn't the result really of some extraordinary individual, as much as our popular culture wants to tell us that, or some company standing out, but the additive accomplishments of numerous people and organizations, right? Hundreds of ordinary people whose names you'll never know are what create, I think, extraordinary outcomes. And so, look, that sticking out part, that risk of standing up, or the extraordinary thing, there might be some wisdom, to not doing that, or hammering in that nail, if you were, at least somebody step on it. I mean, again, if creativity is not the result of some eureka moment or heroic act, right, or one individual risked all, that's fine, because I think those are actually silly mythologies that unfortunately make for memorable folklore, but kind of confuse us into thinking that innovation has to be this sort of scary and thing that stands out. The truth is much messier of how things come about. So, I think, in my opinion, a business or a country that feels like it's falling behind in creativity or competitiveness, fall behind because they're just not working together to pursue a common mission or vision, quite frankly. And that's what we try to do. We try to give people the tools to have the daily conversations, the work that we do, to gain to alignment, to vet through the different ideas, to test the ideas, to really have the day-to-day dialogue, to do their jobs, to make something great happen. And that's the other thing. I mean, again, going back to extraordinary, it's not, everything extraordinary is not necessarily good. Right? Extraordinary means not ordinary. I mean, like when I think about the science behind addictive junk food,
right,
which has led so many Americans into type 2 diabetes and obesity, that's truly extraordinary what they did, right? Or even the design and technology powering all our smartphones we carry with us. These are extraordinary products, but when we consider the number of deaths globally caused by distracted driving, because someone's paying more attention to their text or a Pokemon game on their iPhone, these kinds of innovations cause some rather extraordinary poor outcomes as well. So we got to be careful too how we use that word.
Yeah. And Chris, on that note, I'm sure that at the beginning of this episode, people were unsure when we asked them if they were designers. I hope that by now that they have that they're convinced that they can join us on Team Designer. So, Chris, thank you so much for your time. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you again. Come back
Oh,
anytime.
Brittany, the honor's all mine. I just love what you're doing in this podcast, and it's just been great to be a partner of yours of these past few years. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.